Hello, learning nerds, and welcome on in to the nerdiest podcast you're going to hear today. My name is Dr. Luke Hobson. I am a senior instructional designer, program manager, author, and instructor. My passion, my world is pretty much instructional design, and I consider it my purpose to be able to help you along your own instructional design journey. Whether you are just starting off or you've been doing this for 30 years, all are welcome on in to this show. And of course, you can learn more about myself and everything else that I do over at drlukehobson.com. Folks, a reminder, Instructional Design Institute, our 7-week-long boot camp, is going to be kicking off in only a few days. It's going to be starting on May 1st, so there is still time to apply. And if you don't know what this is, by the way, as I just mentioned, it is a boot camp. This was really designed to be able to teach you about designing learning experiences from everything from start to finish, with the starting point, of course, being talking about andragogy, how adults learn, to working through all the different types of steps and stages until finally you are going to have an end product. You're going to have a learning experience actually created and built and designed well, and you can, of course, use that for a portfolio piece or for whatever else you want to be able to do with it afterwards. This is going to be a cohort-based approach. There's already an amazing community of people who have already been accepted and enrolled into the program, and super excited, honestly, to be able to finally kick this thing off because we have so many diverse backgrounds and skill sets coming into here. It's going to make our community awesome, with some people who are brand new, newest of the newbies, and we have others who have been doing this for 25 years plus. So really can't wait to be able to have that type of collaboration and that type of growth when doing the workshops, the discussions, and of course, everything else. As a reminder too, this is specifically focused on an educational background. As you probably know from listening to the show, my background is higher education. So by all means, I am no expert when it comes to thinking more about using e-learning side of the house, authoring tools, whatever. That is not my jam by any means. It is much more focusing on the learning side as far as sort of learning science, learning strategies, learning assessments. Lots of learning goes into this. I'm thinking much more about that, the research side, the evaluation side, very much so the learning nerd side of the house. So if that does sound interesting to you and you want to be able to learn from me and of course our amazing community, go down below into the show notes, apply today, and I can't wait to see you in our class. All right, well, joining us today is someone you probably know. Her name is Sarah Cannistra. Sarah is the founder of the Overnight Trainer. She also has the Overnight Trainer podcast. And when I think of coaching and the L&D space, I think of Sarah. And that's why I really asked her to come on the show, because there's a lot of kind of some sketchy stuff out there as far as for advice about what to do, what not to do. And I wanted someone to actually come on the show and to talk more about the realistic and the genuine perspective about coaching people, just to let you learn more about what this is actually like to work with a coach. And of course, she works with people from all various levels of expertise, and she talks about that. She does work with some newbies, but also she works with some senior level executive types of folks with helping them to be able to figure out their next career moves as well. So she works with all kinds of people, and I wanted to learn more from her about her different types of tactics. I've been following her for a while on LinkedIn, and she has some really interesting perspectives when it comes to thinking about with resumes, how to be able to find jobs, and more about different types of career tips and guidance to help us along the way. And she did. She shared a whole bunch of awesome, amazing things inside of this episode, and I can't wait for you to listen to it. So I'm going to stop talking so we can dive on into the show. Here is the one and the only Sarah Cannistra. Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
I'm so excited to be here. Finally, with to flip the script. I had you on my show, and now it's my turn to be on yours.
I know. This is going to be awesome, Sarah. I cannot wait. This is going to be so much fun. But of course, before I get ahead of myself, can you just please introduce yourself to the audience? Tell us more about who you are and what it is that you do.
Yeah, thanks. So my name is Sarah Cannistra. I am the founder of the Overnight Trainer. So I'm a career coach and executive coach, specifically in the learning and development space. So I help people from getting into L&D all the way through, growing in their careers, finding that next role, leveling up, and then all the way, like I was saying before, to executive coaching. We were talking about that before we hit record. So high level L&D coaching. So every part of the L&D career, I'm here to support and guide people in.
Wonderful, wonderful. And that is a huge reason for why you were on today's episode, because there are quite a few people who are now inside of this coaching type of space, and even within the L&D coaching world as well too. Yeah. And I'm not going to lie, there's a lot of sketchy people. There's a lot of things where I'm like, I don't really know about this. However, there are people like you who I think about who are actually authentic, genuine people who are great at what it is that you do. And we've been able to see this too from all the results that you've had with many people, over the years. So that's why I wanted you to come on the show. And I would love to hear about what inspired you to get into this type of coaching space to help people to transition over into the L&D world.
Yeah, well, thank you for that glorious introduction. I appreciate that. There's a lot of people out there. There's a lot of noise out there, and I really take a lot of heart in cutting through all of that. And that's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to do this. So I've been in L&D for the last 14 years. Basically became a trainer overnight. If you listen to my podcast, I have my origin story there. But fell in love with learning, became a trainer, ended up working my way up to being the head of L&D for 4 different organizations across all different industries, and absolutely loved it. Fell in love with helping people grow in their careers. But I was working at my last full-time company, and there was a huge disconnect between the way that I wanted to do my job and the way they wanted me to do my job, and even bigger disconnect between the values that we had. So I was really, it felt like it was a very toxic organization for me. Things weren't moving fast enough for me. I didn't have the best leaders, and I was really struggling there mentally. So it was really, positivity is my number 2 strength in Strength Finders, but I was finding myself in a really negative space. And so when I find myself there, usually I know I've lost myself in some way, shape, or form. So I actually started reading the book The Artist's Way. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, by Julia Cameron. And it's one of the activities in there is to do what's called morning pages. And morning pages are basically journaling for three pages every morning, first thing that comes to mind, like not even thinking about it, just journaling. And I was really journaling a lot about what was coming up for me around working in a toxic organization, just feeling so misaligned and how it was eating me alive. And so I was journaling around like the things that I love to do, and everything that kept coming up for me was I loved having a team and helping my team become better trainers. And that just kept coming up. And one day I was just writing and journaling, and the words "the overnight trainer" just came out on the page. And I was like, okay, feel like we could be onto something here. And so I thought, all right, one of the things that's been most impactful to me in my career and helping other people is helping people who were subject matter experts become learning and development professionals, because that was originally my path. And so I thought, okay, I'll help people who are subject matter experts turn trainers become better trainers. But I didn't really know how to do that except for creating a course, because I'm a learning and development professional, right? Like what better thing to do than creating a course? So I created my first signature course, put it out there, thought, I was going to sell like hotcakes. I was going to be a millionaire overnight, but no one knew who I was, what I was doing, why I was doing it. And so it kind of sat on the shelf for a while. But eventually I was working with a coach, and she said to me, yeah, creating courses is great. As you know, you're a learning and development professional. You know how to create courses. She's like, but it sounds like the things that you actually love to do were coaching people and helping people, like actually working with people and doing that. And I was like, oh yeah, actually you're right about that. So bonus points to why coaching can be so important to help us see things that we can't see within ourselves. And so, I just decided, let me try it out, right? Let me sample it out. Let me see what it would look like to help people in their L&D career. And I was on LinkedIn. I was in some sort of training and development group, and I saw someone post it was an educator who was looking to get into learning and development. This is back in 2020. And, she said was asking for help, and no one responded to her at all in this big chat of 20,000 people. And so I wrote to her and I said, hey, I'm thinking about coaching people to be learning and development specialists or whatever it may be. Would you be open to me coaching you? And she's like, sure. And we were just 2 strangers, and I coached her, and within 3 months she went from being a middle school science teacher to an instructional designer making $100,000 a year. And I was like, okay, I think I'm onto something here. And beyond just that, I loved doing it, and it re-energized me. So for me, it was all about helping people in their L&D careers. That's really what it's been about all along. I just had to take my own path to find it. So yeah, once that happened, I was like, okay, this is it. This is the real deal, the real thing. I don't know if there's a market out there for it, but it's what I'm going to try to do. And 4 months later, I was able to quit my full-time job. So there's a market.
That's awesome. That's really impressive.
Yeah.
And one thing too, Sarah, that you mentioned that I actually wanted to highlight really quickly is the fact that you also worked with a coach. And I think that's great because there's a lot of people out there who are like, I reached the pinnacle of my career, so therefore now I'm the one who's always giving advice. And it's just like, but where do those people turn to when they need advice? It's like, you can't just talk to yourself. Like, it is important. And, same thing as well. When even I've reached out to you about something where I'm like, hey, do you have 5 minutes? Like, I have no idea about what to do. Yeah. Can I pick your brain for a second? Like, coaching comes from any point of time during your career. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Because
for sure. I always
not a lot of people know that.
Yeah, the best coaches have coaches. Like,
exactly.
My clients ask me all the time, like, how are you able to like have a great mindset? And I'm like, I don't have a great mindset all the time. Like, I have a coach and 2 therapists. Like, hello, like, this it takes work, And we were talking before you hit record around like you can do all these things by yourself. I could have started a business by myself, and I could have probably eventually figured out that I wanted to coach by myself, but I was able to go farther faster because I had someone to bounce ideas off of and to see the me that I couldn't see in that moment as well. So, I've never since starting coaching, I've never not had a coach. And it's been such an expander for me. And I, as a coach, obviously I'm biased, but I highly recommend getting a coach.
Sure. It totally makes sense. So let's talk about coaching. Let's actually kind of go through, I'd love to hear more about like breaking this kind of down step by step that as somebody comes to you and kind of walking us through about this entire journey. So what advice would you give to somebody? Perhaps they're hesitant, they're on the fence, they're starting to think about this. What are the first steps that you would actually give to somebody who wants to try to be able to make this type of change, this type of transition?
Yeah, and people who know me, so people who are listening to this, they know exactly what I'm about to say. Well, actually, I'm going to say one thing that might not be what people are expecting, but the second thing people are definitely expecting. The first thing is making sure that L&D is actually what you want to do. So I think a lot of people get to a point where they're told, especially educators. I know you probably have a lot of educators listening to your podcast, whether K through 12, higher ed, everything in between. I like to say that there was a bad game of telephone that started like late 2019, early 2020, which told educators that their only way out of the classroom was to become instructional designers. And so what happens is then people think, oh, my only way out is to be an instructional designer, or even we can be more broad, right? To be in learning and development. But there are so many skills that you can utilize that are transferable into L&D, but also transferable outside of L&D. I've had people come to me who thinking they want to be in L&D and realize they want to be in marketing, realize they want to be in sales. And the process is still always going to be the same. My process works across industries. I just focus on L&D. And so I think first step is like, do I actually want to be in L&D, or did someone tell me I should be in L&D? So really figuring that piece out. That can be a little tricky, but when you're like, oh, okay, L&D sounds pretty good, then I'll say, so that's like point A. But the first true step, once you figured out that L&D is for you, is to identify your L&D niche. So everyone's like, duh, we knew she was going to say that. If you know me, you know I'm going to say that. And your niche is the intersection between your skills, your interests, and your values, right? So most people, what they do is they say, okay, I want to be in L&D. Great, here's some jobs, just some job descriptions, some job titles. I'm going to pick a job title, and that's what I'm going to go with. But the way L&D works, as well as every other industry, is there's no standardization, right? So you could pull 3 instructional designer jobs right now, as you probably know. All 3 will have 3 different job descriptions essentially, but they're all called instructional designer. And so what happens is people can get really stuck on these titles. So what I say is forget the titles, find your L&D niche, the intersection between the transferable skills you have, the interests that you actually want to do and explore in your next role, as well as the values that you want to share with your next company. And really what you do is once you figure that out, then your output, which is what I call your niche statement, is being able to articulate what it is you want to do, how you want to do it, and for who you want to do it for. And rather than you trying to fit into every other box that's out there, right? I'm going to fit into this instructional design box. I'm going to fit into this learning experience designer box. I'm going to fit into this training specialist box. You're creating your own box and you're saying, oh, this job and this job description fits in my box. That job description doesn't fit into my box. And so you get to be really, really aligned with the roles that you apply to and the roles that are right for you. So first step, besides figuring out if L&D is right for you, if you decide it is, figuring out what your L&D niche is, that will be your North Star throughout the entire process.
I love that. Now, are there certain types of, as you mentioned about like basically triangulation of the data is like the nerd in me was just like, oh, you do that. And that's really interesting to hear about your philosophy with that. Are there certain types of key qualities that if somebody says like, hey, Sarah, I just did what you just asked me to do with this exercise and I've been able to identify, X, Y, and Z that you're like, yes, that makes sense. You should be pursuing this field. Or is there something that they might say and you're like, actually, no, that quality might be best served, as you said, in marketing or within IT or customer support or something along those lines?
Yeah, that happens. I mean, I have a client right now who is in my group program, who in doing all of this realized that she also has a love for marketing. And so one of the conversations we had was, do you want to go into marketing with a learning lens, or do you want to go into learning with a marketing lens, right? So you get to choose. We were actually having a conversation about this morning too. And so it's really the beauty of your niche statement is that it's yours, right? Your niche is yours. So you get to decide that. And so that's also, I think, why having a coach is important, because I can ask that question. I can say, hey, when you think about what's next for you and the impact you want to have, right? Is that in a marketing role, but you know that a lot of marketing is training people, right? Like that's really what marketing is. Or is it training and learning that you want to be in, but we know that really good learning has to be marketed, right? So you get to decide. And ultimately she said, I really want to be in learning, but I want to bring that marketing lens into it. And so that was really helpful for us to have that conversation and for me to ask those questions of her and let her reflect on that too. So occasionally that happens. I would say for the most part, when people get to me, they're pretty sure that learning is for them. However, most people, when they get to me, they've picked a job title, and that's the rewiring of the brain that we need to do more than like, is L&D right for me?
That makes sense. So you just mentioned about reflecting with your that client we were just referring to. Reflecting for some people seems to be extremely difficult to do when they're not in the best mental space. Because I'm not sure about it for who you've been talking with over these years, but I know for a lot of people I talk to, it's when they're already done. They're super checked out, they're burned out, and then that's when I was just like, yeah, but I want you to reflect upon what you've done, like your accomplishments, your skills, your passions. Like I want you to go through things. And a lot of the time, that's when it's like the trickiest. Because at this point in time, you're feeling defeated. You hate your job. Your boss is a jerk. And, it's just like, I'm worthless. And it's like, no, you're not. You're in a bad place right now. But but we can get you there. So how do you help people to identify their skills and their strengths when perhaps they're not in the best headspace right now and things don't really look so great? How do you help them from that perspective?
Yeah. That's like 99.9% of the people that I work with. And I will say this, right? Like, if anyone, I'm going to say a quick little story and I'm going to answer that, because I was just at a conference, the Talent Development Think Tank conference, where I spoke on finding your L&D niche and creating a blueprint. And what was funny is afterwards, someone came into my session after it had ended, and she said, I didn't come to your session because I actually like my job right now. And I thought that thinking about my next step meant that I have to hate my job. And it was so interesting because I think we societally, right, we're conditioned that like, stay where you are while you're happy, but as soon as you're not happy, then start looking. And there's something really beautiful about being happy and also thinking about what's next for you. And it doesn't even necessarily mean you're going to leave your job. It might mean that your scope changes and things like that. So if anyone's listening and they're like, oh, but I really love my job, I'm just going to stop listening to this episode right now because I don't care about what's next. Keep listening because I think it's really important to always be, you don't have to always be upskilling and always be like, applying, but always be thinking about, your overarching legacy that you want to leave behind. And then what's that next step there? So I want to say that piece, but going back to the mindset, I honestly say that career transitioning is 90% mindset, 10% strategy. I give you the strategy. You work for me. You work with me. I literally give you the step-by-step strategy that has worked for 200 plus people. Like that's the easy part. The hard part is our mindset around it. And so I think what's really, really important, that kind of first step in mindset, confidence and clarity live, like, to me, they are like brother and sister, like a very, very close brother and sister. Like it's very hard to have one without the other. And so what I encourage people to do where people are getting to that burnt out phase a lot of times, especially in career transitioning, because they don't have the clarity. They're throwing spaghetti at the wall. They're hoping something sticks. I call it being in the vicious application cycle. You know, you apply to anything and everything, then you're getting rejections. You apply to things that maybe you're actually overqualified for because you're getting rejections. Then you get rejected from that. And you're like, what's wrong with me? No one wants me. Like that job I could do in my sleep. And so you keep kind of going into this cycle. And that will really mess with your mindset. Like that will really, really mess with your mindset. Rejection sucks. Period. Right? Like no one's like, yes, rejection. But that kind of keeps us in that spiral. So one of the things that's really important is that we like cut ourselves off from that. And so usually when clients come and work with me, we like stop all applications right away. And that can be really scary, especially if you're like, I need to get out from where I am, and I'm not applying for jobs. But it's that calm, that giving yourself a break and a space from it to get clarity. And a lot of that clarity, the more clarity that you can get, the more confident then you can become. And you kind of get into this much better cycle of, as I'm getting clearer, I'm getting more confident. And as I'm getting more confident, I can be more reflective because I now look back at my skills and I can look at them from a different lens. So my advice is if you're feeling that way, it's a good time to actually take a pause. And most people think, I got to push through, I got to push through, I got to push through. But pushing through actually holds you back versus taking a pause and reevaluating is what will quantum leap you forward. So taking a pause, reevaluating, getting clear on what it is you actually want to do, not what you think you should be doing next. That is a really great place to start a mindset shift. And then from there, figuring out too, like what are the stories you're telling yourself? What are the root thoughts? I was literally just having this conversation with my group coaching this morning. Like, what are the root thoughts that are the stories that we've been telling ourselves? And how does that react how we're speaking and how we're showing up and our behaviors? And how can we start to rework those? It takes time, but it's being conscious of it too.
All of that makes sense. And I'm also really glad that you mentioned too, by the way, about how even if you were happy, you can still look for jobs. Because I definitely have talked to a lot of people who are, as you literally mentioned, where they're like, no, everything is fine. It's great. It's okay. And then all of a sudden it's just like, and all of a sudden now I'm just, I can't do it anymore. And like, okay. So there had to have been some signs along the way that maybe let's just think about things, explore options here. And as you mentioned too, you changing about the project scope of work. I've also found for some people that they can just do their job, but if you are able to go and do something on the side, as far as for consulting, teaching, speaking, whatever, that sometimes that kind of fills that gap of trying to just add a little bit of something into your job, where you're like, okay, now this is better. Like it doesn't. It's not always the thing. Do you find though about when someone is trying to think of, so let's say if somebody hypothetically speaking is happy, they're great, but they're starting to look for a job. Do you find, has anyone ever told you about how they kind of feel almost like remorseful in a sense because their leader is wonderful and they feel like they're kind of like backstabbing them from like, it's like, is that a common thing? Cause I've heard that and I had no idea if that's a normal thing.
Oh yeah. I have a whole podcast episode on it called Job Search Guilt. Like, and how to
really?
from it. Yeah. Because it's totally a real thing, because I think also, again, going back like societally, and I think I hate to like talk about things in generations, but I think the millennial generation, we kind of started the like, oh, do I need to be as loyal as I am? And Gen Z is like, treat me right or I'm out of here, right? So like I love Gen Z for that. So not to generalize too much, but like props to Gen Z for saying like pay me what you owe me or I am out of here. But you know, it's interesting. I think about my mom, and I think about my mom tells me that my grandfather used to instill in her, you know, two things about working: you don't rock the boat and you don't quit. And so I think generationally that's been passed down to us, of I'm treated well, I'm paid well. I may not like this or like that, or I may be overworked, but I'm treated well. And I saw that actually a lot in that last company I was at, where it was like, people like, oh, well, you know, when I had to go to a doctor's appointment, they let me go to a doctor's appointment. And like, so all these things, and it does remind me of like, I think sometimes too, like being in a toxic manipulative relationship as well, where it's like that, we had allowed ourselves to let the bar be so low that I think organizations and companies were like, oh, okay, that's all it takes to keep people, is like giving them, an extra PTO day to go on a doctor's appointment. So I think we kind of we allowed this to happen for a long time, but now things have changed. But we as workers have not necessarily all caught up to that, and there is that sense of loyalty. And so I think it's remembering that you can still be loyal to your organization. It doesn't mean that you're like gonna leave and literally arson the place, right? Like,
Sure.
and it's also, I think, remembering too, like, I say this jokingly, but I do mean it. It's like my life changed drastically when I realized I wasn't that important, and not in a self-loathing way, but like, I knew when I left my last job, like, things weren't gonna collapse. Like, my mom said, everyone's replaceable. Like, everyone is replaceable. And it's remembering that at any moment, your boss could get another job offer. And here you are, so loyal to this person. Most likely they're not going to be as loyal to you. And that's okay, right? Like, you really should be, in this sense, looking out for yourself, your well-being, your family's well-being, right? At the end of the day, like, we can't give our jobs are just a part of us, right? And like, it's really important to ask ourselves, like, what do I need? What does my family need? And if someone is a true good leader, if a company has true great culture, they are going to champion you leaving. If they are going to make you feel bad, make you feel guilty, they are actually not who you think you are, and you shouldn't be loyal to them anyways. So I think it's really important to put that into perspective of, like, if this really is a great leader, a great culture, a great company, they're going to be really excited. Will they be sad? Yes. But will they be excited for you? Yes. Because a true great leader, that's what they want from their people, to move up. And if they can't move up where they are, to be able to move out somewhere else too. So it's remembering that piece as well.
Yeah. And you are replaceable, which I know is, once again, it sounds really bad, but it's true. That is,
it's not like we're heart surgeons in the middle of, like, heart surgery, and they're like, oh, you know what? I quit. And it's like, okay, well, this person's going to die on the table. It's like, we're in learning and development, everyone. Like, let's relax.
That's what I always say. I was just like, is anyone going to die if you don't do this? And they're like, no. And I'm like, okay, then we'll be, exactly. Then we can ask for more time. We can beg for forgiveness later. Like, we can figure it out. Like, it's this, it's not that crazy. And one thing that you said too, in which actually I did do this, where I had a sense that one of my leaders who was awesome was going to be leaving. And that made me instantly be like, I'm finding a new job, because they're fantastic and they're going to be gone. And now my world's going to get rocked. And I'm like, no, I'm good. I told her to be a part of that.
I have an executive coaching client right now who, her leader got promoted, as good leaders do, got promoted. And she was very nervous about getting a new leader. And it took some time and adjustment. And now she's so happy with him as her leader. And it's a really great, a really great relationship. But again, it's like, if that is such a great leader that you have, most likely they're going to get promoted or poached or all of those things too. So just like that, if everyone just stays loyal like that, no one grows, and it's not fair to anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go back to one thing you've actually mentioned a couple of times. And this was one thing, actually, when I was crafting up interview questions, this is the first thing I wrote down, because you talk about it so much on LinkedIn, where I'm like, I need her to explain so much more about this, because you changed my mindset around this actual tactic, by the way, where you mentioned about not just searching for the job title. And for me, of course, my world's instructional design. So naturally, before I was like, look up my instructional design jobs. But of course, as you mentioned, though, that you can pull 3 different job postings, and all 3 are wildly different backgrounds, different requirements, different responsibilities. And you're like, oh yeah. And I know that this can actually, now in future thinking, that this can actually hurt your job hunting process if you're just really looking so narrowly at something. So I'd love for you to explain more about what made you realize this, to be able to say it's not just about the job title, but also how do you get around the fact that if you're looking for something, as far as for like with LinkedIn Jobs or Glassdoor, Indeed, whatever you're using, you have to put in a title. So how do you get around that to be able to still see the jobs that you want to see?
Or do you?
Like, I don't know. Tell me more about this.
Or do you, Luke? So it goes back to, we'll always say this, goes back to finding your niche and getting really, really clear about what are the skills and the interests that you have that you want to utilize in your next role. And I always encourage you to have a list of at least 10, like really thinking about, skills that you want to utilize, and knowing how you want to utilize them. And some, you may not have the 100% picture, but like getting clear on like, all right, I have the skill of strategy, right? And what does that look like in terms of how I want to use that skill in my next role? Or I have the skill of instructional design. It's remembering too that instructional design isn't just a field, but it's actually also a skill, right? So I have the skill of instructional design, but what does that look like for me in my next role? So having this list, I say 10 is a good place to start. Then what you can start to do is, rather than searching for job titles, I love to use LinkedIn. It's my favorite search for jobs. Start to put in those skills. So you can use a Boolean search. And let's say, for example, you have strategy, instructional design, collaboration, let's say facilitation. Okay. Let's say like those are like your top 4. You can then search and use a Boolean search inside of LinkedIn jobs, and all the roles that include instructional design, facilitation, strategy, and collaboration will come up for you. Now, it takes some time to do that. I will say the way I'm explaining it now is much easier said than done. It is something that I coach a lot on, is like, how do we make sure we're looking for the right search terms, and are they in alignment with your niche? And it takes time for the algorithm to catch up too. So give yourself some grace around that. But what will happen is it will start pulling up roles that have those search terms in them. And so you can start to go through and say, oh, here's this role that's called like instructional liaison, 49. And you're like, oh, that wouldn't have come up if I typed in instructional designer. But here it's talking about instructional design, collaboration, facilitation, some strategy, right? So it's really important to do that. I remember really early on with my first client, it was the aha moment for me, because I was like, oh, I don't think, because like even though her title is instructional designer, that's not all she does. She wanted to be able to facilitate and do all of those things, but she was finding instructional designer roles that were like more back end, more, not human facing necessarily, not facilitation. And so I was like, I know for a fact there's worlds where that exists, but if we're just typing in instructional designer, we're not going to necessarily find that. And so I started typing in other words and realized, oh, a Boolean search, I didn't even know it was called that at first, but yeah, so I say don't type in titles at all. I tell my clients have 3 to 5 sets of 3 to 5 search terms, and utilizing that, getting into a good habit. Eventually you'll probably narrow those down, because you'll see, oh, every time I search for this one, I'm finding 1 or 2 roles, but they're also popping up in this one. So you'll start to see that. You can also do that with values to really start to understand the value piece of seeing what organizations exist out there that share those same values. Again, they may not have roles at this particular moment for you, but doing that to say, okay, for me, I value integrity and creativity and innovation. You could type those 3 into the job search in LinkedIn, and you can see which companies are coming up that are talking about those words often too. So you do not need to search by job title.
That's interesting.
In fact, I forbid it.
I've never thought about it like that way before. That's super interesting. Yeah. So from what you just said about with talking about like the values, understanding about like culture, leadership, things of that nature, do you recommend people go to Glassdoor and look up the ratings of a company and then try to see what they have to offer that way? So you're kind of like reverse engineering it in a sorts to say like, oh, this place has been reviewed as like 5 out of 5 best place to work for. Hey, why don't you think about that? Like putting that inside of like making a mental note of if Google, whoever, whoever is going to be doing something, you're like, oh, I should think more about them. Does that ever come up?
I think Glassdoor is helpful. I definitely always say take Glassdoor with a grain of salt, because I do think it's kind of like Yelp in a sense, where like people are really quick to go in there and be like, this was the worst meal I ever had. But like a lot of people are like, oh, this is a great meal. And they're not like, oh, let me go on Yelp and put it on Yelp, right? So, although I've been told that like Gen Z doesn't use Yelp anymore, so maybe I'm dating myself, but I've been told it's not cool to use Yelp anymore. But you kind of get where I'm going there. And so I think Glassdoor, how I like to encourage my clients to use it, is if a role pops up for you, let's say you're on LinkedIn, a role pops up and you're like, oh, this this role intrigues me. Like I always say too, like you don't have to feel the like butterflies immediately, right? It's like not a romantic comedy where we're looking across the the dance floor and we're like, that's the job for me forever. It's like we don't know that yet. That's not real life. But if it intrigues you enough, feels like it's in your niche, before applying, I think it's important to see, hey, is this a company that I would be, again, intrigued to work for? So that's usually when I would encourage people to go to Glassdoor. Again, it's a great site for understanding the reviews, but I really encourage you also to read the reviews and look for patterns, because when we think about, a lot of people are looking at it because they want to avoid working for a toxic organization. Mm-hmm. And so that's like the biggest fear. I don't want to work for a toxic organization. But the reality is, like, what's toxic for one person may not be toxic for another. So for me, when I look back at my last company, very toxic for me. Very, very, very toxic. But two of my best friends who are amazing and like love each other, still work there. And they don't find it toxic because while we have some similar values, what values they want to share in a company are different than the values that I want to share in a company. So for them, if they were to read my experience in a review, they may be like, okay, well, that's her experience, So I think it's important to really read through them as much as you can. And if you're starting to see patterns that don't align with your values, that's a good like red flag for you. But it might be some things that don't matter to you necessarily, right? Like maybe it's something that like, maybe they're talking about there not being a good, balance for mothers in the workplace. And maybe you don't want to be a mother or have any plans to be a mother. So that may not be a make or break for you necessarily, right? But for a mother, that could be a really toxic workplace to be in. So it's just one example of a million that could be out there. So yeah, I think it's a tool. I don't think it's like the gospel on if a company is good or not. But I think it's just one piece of data that you can take in for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know a lot of people, by the way, who still work within higher education because of the benefits package. That's why they're there. Salary is blah, but they're like, doesn't matter. I'm here for forever because of doing. It's like, okay, yeah, you gotta do what's best for you. So exactly. I get it. You mentioned about data and being able to think about tools, and that's one of our tools that we could potentially use. I'd love to pick your brain about trends, because there are many trends within the learning and development space, and I feel like there is a new one every single day. All we're currently talking about is AI, but a few years ago, it was talking about micro-learning and then gamification and then talking about simulations. And like every year we seem to have a thing, and don't get me wrong, they all have their own place and time and purpose and whatever, but we do a great job of like hyping things up beyond all belief, and then all of a sudden everyone's like, what is this? And it's like that full deep dive into whatever. I'm guilty of that as well. If anyone has Googled me and see ChatGPT, you kind of know that I fall into this kind of early adopter bucket of technology and stuff. But when it comes to being able to think more about from a career perspective of, you want to make sure that you are monitoring, you're aware of trends because they may pop up in interviews and applications and whatnot. How do you advise people to do this? And you yourself, how do you actually monitor that to know what's noise and what actually is something that potentially is here to stay?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think I'll start with the last of it and kind of move our way forward. So for me, I like to monitor those trends. For me, I also spend like about 5% of my working time each year consulting. So like from a strategic learning perspective. And I do that, A, because I love to do it in small doses. And B, I also do it to make sure I keep myself in the game to know like what's going on out there too. So I can better help my clients. Same thing with my executive coaching clients. I'm working a lot on like, hey, what's happening in the organization, all of those trends. So for me, I get to explore some of those through other people, which is nice for me. And allow and kind of give them and say, hey, here's this trend that's happening here. This could help with what you're doing. But I think it's really important, and this is in career transitioning and also just with any new tool, is to ask yourself like, is this relevant to me and what I want to do in the future? So I think we can get really, really, really caught up in like the long list of technology we need to learn, the long list of trends that are coming up. But, for example, if my role is to be a facilitator, let's say that's what I want to do, it's what I want to do 24/7, that's the job I'm looking to have. Do I really need to focus on utilizing ChatGPT right now? Probably not, right? I really want to focus on like how do I upskill and become the best facilitator? Does that mean that maybe there'll be some, AI tool around, giving me feedback? Those exist, right? So I think it's getting clear on like what is it I actually want to do, and then what tools exist to help me do that, versus here's all these tools, let me put myself into all these and get really overwhelmed. So I think it again goes back, I'll keep saying it, when you know your niche, it's really easy to say, oh, there's AI out there. Okay, well maybe ChatGPT isn't for me, but there's a cool AI tool that I can facilitate into, and it will give me feedback on my ums or my likes or those type of things. So I think getting really clear again on what you want to do next, the impact you want to have, and then what tools can complement that, what trends can complement that, is a much better way than like, this is a trend, gotta learn it. That's a trend, gotta learn it. It's like trends in clothing. It's like if you're gonna buy every single thing, your closet's gonna be jam-packed and you're never gonna know what to wear. And I think the same thing with this, where it's like there's so many trends to try on. Well, which one feels good to you? Which one do you feel the best in? Which one accentuates what it is you want to accentuate? So thinking about it that way is how I like to coach my clients, because it does get very overwhelming with so many trends, and so many things happen. Now trends are moving so much faster than they have in the past too. So I think just keeping that in mind. How do I make the trend will it accentuate, or is it something I can just let go? It's okay. You don't have to know every trend at all.
Exactly. I get asked like, how do I keep up with every trend? And I'm like, I don't.
Yeah.
No idea. I can only do so much.
And again, like we're just learning and development professionals, like learning is learning. We go back, like I think it's also too always important to go back to the basics, go back to the core. Like sometimes I was talking about this with some of my clients recently too, where it's like we put all of our pressure, especially career transitioners, put so much pressure on like knowing every tool, every trend, every piece of technology. But if you actually go inside of an organization, like 90% of organizations, like they're using PowerPoint and Camtasia and an LMS, and they're facilitating, and they're doing the best they can with what they have, and they're making really great blended learning programs and social learning programs. Like they're doing great work, but like they're not all like replaced by AI robots. So it's like, also remember, like 90% of organizations aren't even necessarily ready for those trends, and our learners might not be ready for those trends yet. Like we can't go beyond them, because then it's going to be our learning's not going to be relevant to them anymore. We have to keep them in mind. Like, does this trend actually work for them?
Yes, which also I have now learned from terrifying people. When I first was dabbling at ChatGPT back in December, and I was just like, look what it can do. And like a majority of people I showed it to were like, that's going to replace me. And I'm like, oh, I didn't think about it from that perspective. I just wanted to show you how this could potentially make you do your job in a more efficient way. It was like how I was envisioning it, where they saw it from the other side. It's like, mental note, try to be able to read the room a little bit better, Luke, before you're like, woohoo, like look at this stuff. And it's like, I guess I need to think about that. But one thing I do want to ask you about, though, with AI is that when I first started to actually really like throw myself into this whole AI world just to learn more, the first thing that came to mind, I was trying to be able to identify what pain points do I have within my world that I just don't want to do anymore. Could AI help me with that? And the things that popped up to me were resume, CV, and cover letter, where I'm like, this is pain. I hate updating this. I have to just because I should. But I found when I first tried using ChatGPT for, asking it to be able to do a few of these things, it was okay. It wasn't like that great. But the more I kept on feeding it better prompts, the more I fed it more about me and updating it, eventually it got pretty darn good. It was, like I still obviously not perfect. You always need to go back and tweak and, change some things. But overall, not bad at all. Have you found that to be the case of telling folks about how this could potentially be a tool to help them? Do you advise, don't trust this thing because it's not there yet? Like, how do you approach AI within your world?
Yeah, so it's interesting when it comes to resumes, because I teach a very, very, very specific format. It's actually how like Harvard Business School recommends their resumes to be structured. Yet, of course, I put like a Sarah spin on it because
of course, yeah.
We're learning professionals, right?
You gotta do your own thing.
We gotta make it a little fun. But really, my big philosophy on resumes and what I've seen work. I actually just posted about this on LinkedIn today, which is funny. But where I have seen the most success with clients is, and I'm going to go back to talking about your niche, and everyone's going to be like, of course she is, but is rather than creating a resume and updating a resume for every job, creating one resume that is niche aligned. So align with the skills that you want to utilize in your next role. I always say a resume should be, your resume is a marketing document that explores and it tells the reader what you want to do next through the lens of what you've done in the past. And ChatGPT can't do that. And so while they could put together a pretty decent resume, a decent cover letter, what happens is, and this is what I was posting about today, is people are feeding it the job description for the job they want to apply for. They're feeding it their past resume. They're feeding it some information about themselves. But what's happening then is ChatGPT, or even people just do this non-ChatGPT, they basically create a carbon-esque copy of the job description. And so now what recruiters and hiring managers are getting is basically the job description just regurgitated back to them. So nothing actually, even if it looks different, it's not actually different content, because everyone's been trained, tailor the resume to the job description, tailor the resume to the job description. It's like, great, I'm a hiring manager and I have 20 resumes in front of me that are basically the exact words I just put on a job description. Wow, I have this 21st resume here that is giving me all of the skills that I actually want someone to utilize in their next role. And I'm hearing about it from a experiential perspective. And it's allowing me now to say, oh, let me tie each one of these to what it is I'm actually hiring for. And on top of that, what I find that ChatGPT can't do that a human can do is, and I'm all for AI, by the way. So I know I'm kind of sounding like I'm not, but I'm all for it. I'll talk about, how I do encourage using it, but is what I call your secret sauce. So for example, years ago, I was hiring for an instructional designer role, and I had a bunch of, standard instructional design resumes in front of me. But the one that stood out the most to me was one where not only did she have some instructional design, not as much as the other people did, but she had a lot of creative writing skills, and she highlighted those on her resume. Again, did my job description have anything about creative writing or content writing or technical writing? Not at all. But when I saw and it wasn't, half a resume about it, but when I saw those couple bullet points that talked about the creative writing piece that she had, I was like, oh, I didn't even know I needed that skill, but I want that skill. I want that on my team. I didn't know I needed it until I saw it in front of me. And so what happens is that's why I encourage people to get really clear on their niche, the skills they want to utilize. And that's what we market, because you never know when that hiring manager, that recruiter is going to say, yeah, great, they have all the things I knew I wanted, but here's things I didn't even know I needed, and this person has it. So again, if you're feeding ChatGPT a lot of that stuff around the job description, your past work experience, like it misses the secret sauce that I think really makes you stand out in a sea of applicants. Where I think it's beneficial, I also don't recommend it for cover letters. I spent maybe 2 full weeks. I just released a new module inside of my L&D resume reprogram course called Cover Letter Magic, and I spent like 2 full weeks in ChatGPT feeding it all this information to see if it could create a cover letter that mirrored the model that I like to teach, which is using a three story arc for your cover letter, being the trailer to your resume. And it couldn't get there. And how I recommend it though is it can be really helpful to help you finesse some things. So if you can ask ChatGPT, how do I best describe how I did this, and this, how can I synthesize that or best describe that? So I think ChatGPT is really helpful for generating ideas, or if you're feeling I don't know how to say this, I'm just going to type into ChatGPT and see what they say, and it can help you to like I said, generate ideas. I find it really helpful to do that. If you're having a writer's block moment, a brain blank moment, it's really helpful for that. But to actually replace doing your resume and doing your cover letter, I think it just puts you in the same category as you kind of were in before, of it being just so standard to what it is that society kind of expects to see, that it takes away some of that secret sauce and some of that personality that really only you can put in there because it's you.
Yeah, that makes sense. When you did that, by the way, when you fed it all this data, did you feed it your actual words about you either writing something for blog posts or journals or something? Did you actually feed it all of that type of personal information?
I fed it, so I didn't do it for me. I used like a couple of different client samples, like in different levels.
Sure.
But yeah, I fed them LinkedIn posts that they had written, their resume, their current resume, work experience, what are the things they want to do in their next role. Like, I fed it a lot of information, and still I found it just felt like it read like a computer wrote it.
Yeah.
And I think eventually probably it could, like, we're moving into a phase where like
It's gonna get there.
very quickly it will get there. And
Yeah.
so at that point I'll reevaluate. But I think even
Sure.
at that point too, it's like, just make sure your personality's in there, and make sure
Yeah.
it's niche aligned, right? Like, my whole thing is, you should never have to redo your cover letter or your resume for the jobs that you're applying for. Like, maybe you're tweaking one little thing here and there, but if the role you're applying to really is aligned with your niche, and your niche is aligned with your resume is aligned with your niche, then there's nothing to update. And that saves like so many hours. It makes the process so much easier. So yeah, I think we'll get there. Right now, I'd like to use it more for like writer's block. How do I word things? And I talk about that in my L&D resume reprogram course. I talk about how we can use it for that, but not use it as a replacement.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that and the reason why I asked that, by the way, is to put a little point on that one, is that I fed it almost like all the stuff I've ever had. Anything I've written out was just like, here you go. And then I basically asked it to write for me a type of like a bio, because that was another thing. I was just like, I always hate writing bios. And I was like, tell me about me. I don't want to talk about my accomplishments. Like, whatever. And it ended it by saying like, Luke's a proud learning nerd. And I was like, well, okay. Like, it identified. And I was just like, man, that's like my trademark thing I say. I was like, okay, we're getting there. Like, it's not there yet.
But it's really smart. I think it's
crazy.
really good. And I think for things like that, like for a bio, I think for, telling it, maybe it can help with like some of your LinkedIn stuff. So you're about me, you can like feed it, and it can help. I think it's really helpful to synthesize. Like, that's really where I think, like, rather than it giving you the answers, like, it's really helpful to synthesize those things that maybe you're like, oh, I wouldn't have put it that way, or that is a good way of putting it. Like, I'm going to use this word instead of that word. So I think it's really helpful for idea generation, for synthesizing a lot. And I know it'll get better, right? And I'm sure my opinion will change on it, and will expand, I'll say, actually, on it. But that's where we're at right now. End of March 2023.
That makes I say timestamp this podcast episode.
Like, Sarah doesn't believe in AI. I'm like, no, I swear I do.
Yeah, things will change every single day. So whatever. I'm sure this isn't going to be even remotely close to helpful 6 months from now about how to use ChatGPT.
Sorry, everyone who's listening to this.
Right, we'll be using a whole new thing, and it's fine. This is fine. Well, Sarah, I want to make sure that I'm being conscious of time, so I just have one more question that I'd love to hear more from you. Could you just give us an example about a success story about how you helped somebody to transition from coming to you and then from where they are now? I would just love to have an example, because I am an instructional designer, and I like examples of things.
I'm going to talk about one of my clients who I like to talk about. I like to talk about all of them, but one of my clients, Emma. So she's actually one of my first ever clients that I had early on, end of 2020, and she was really one of the first ones too, where I was able to utilize a lot of my processes. So really being able to figure out what her niche was, create that. She was the first person I created this niche aligned resume with, cover letter, all of those things, personal brand around that niche. And really being able to walk through that, and a lot of the work was mindset too, right? Like, it was really where I realized, hey, a lot of this is that mindset piece, and how do we move forward? And what I love about Emma and so many of my clients that come to me, and I'm so grateful that I am able to attract purpose-driven people, right? So like being able to really find that purpose in there and align. So yeah, Emma and I worked together for a couple months, and through her, her resume, through networking, she I always say there's like a 3-prong approach to finding your L&D career. There's actually applying for roles, there's networking, and there's creating your personal brand. And somewhere in the middle of all of those, we don't know what's going to hit when, but that's what's going to help you land that role. So she really took to heart all of that, and creating her niche aligned personal brand, creating some small pieces of content, having conversations, networking with people. She's such an expert at networking, really focusing on applying for roles that are within her niche. And she landed a role as, she was in higher education as an academic advisor, and landed a role for a company as an L&D program manager, really focusing on crafting and creating and completely overhauling an onboarding program, which was exactly what her niche was. She really wanted to focus on onboarding and facilitation, and that is exactly what she was doing. And what's been really great is that we've continued to work together in a coaching capacity, and also and now we're friends. And so what's been really beautiful is to see her and work alongside her grow in that role. She's recently been promoted, so now she's a hiring manager in the space, and then seeing her grow beyond that too. So not only now a year later did she not only did she land that role, she got promoted within a year. Now has someone reporting into her, and now she started her own side business in addition, like we were talking about earlier. She's a resume coach, and so now her and I are actually working together in that capacity, and she's joining me inside the L&D Career Club to help people with their resumes too. So it's just really beautiful to have. And I get this a lot of clients who go from being career coaching clients to executive coaching clients, to really watch that transition happen, going from transitioning into L&D to then completely nailing their role that they get, to getting promoted, making more money, having a team, getting a bigger, deeper scope, and then getting to really do what lights them up and working for a great team. So Emma's just one example of many. It's the beauty of now having done this for a couple years, of seeing just what happens, and now seeing some of my original clients at conferences and speaking on podcasts, and being these thought leaders that a year or 2 years ago they never imagined being that, or that they could be that. And so just, I think more than anything, the confidence that comes from being in your dream role, from having an amazing team, from being value aligned with your department, with your manager, and with your organization, what that actually does for you and how it feeds your life and fuels your life, versus a lot of people who think their job sucks away their life. It's really amazing to see people, purpose-driven people, who are aligned and who are getting so much from their job versus giving so much.
I love it. I love that empowerment. That's why I wanted to end the interview with that question, because I know it'll make people feel good. So hooray. Sarah, once again, thank you so much for being on this podcast. It has been an absolute delight to learn more from you. Where can people go to learn more about you and your work? Where can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on LinkedIn, Sarah Cannistra. Find me, connect with me, message me, all the things. Love to hear from you. I have a podcast called the L&D Career Club, so you can always find that podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. I have an amazing episode. Actually, one of my most listened episodes is with the great Dr. Luke Hobson, so feel free to listen to that. You can find me at theovernighttrainer.com if you're interested in the L&D Career Club, which is a 6-month membership to redefine your L&D career. You can go to theovernighttrainer.com/LDCC and get all the information there. But yeah, any questions you have. Oh, I'm also on Instagram. I'm working on it. So, not as impressive as my LinkedIn, but you can definitely follow me there. DM me on there as well.
I really should start doing Instagram. I don't want to, but I probably should. Anyway, that's a different conversation. Sarah, once again, thank you. You just reminded me of it. It was like, oh yeah, that's a to-do list. I gotta explore more platforms. But like you, LinkedIn has been so valuable. Where I'm like, but that's just, LinkedIn. I love that platform the most.
That's how we know each other. All my L&D besties I met on LinkedIn.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes, that's the thing. But anyway, Sarah, once again, thank you for so much being on the podcast. Absolutely wonderful. Great chat. And so glad to have you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Luke. Appreciate it.
Sarah, once again, thank you so much for coming on the show. Folks at home, I hope you enjoyed that conversation, that you learned a thing or two along the way. It was an awesome conversation. I love chatting with Sarah. I've been friends with her for a while now. So hearing more about her tactics and her different types of pieces of words of wisdom and advice, I'm sure is going to be able to help you out along your own instructional design journey. If it was helpful, as Sarah mentioned, connect with her. Reach out to her on LinkedIn, Instagram, and of course, all the links are going to be inside of a show notes for you to connect over with her. But be sure to tag her, say hi, and of course, let her know that I sent you over to her way. Once again, as a reminder, folks, Instructional Design Institute kicks off May 1st. If you want to be able to nerd out with me and an amazing community for 7 weeks, so talking about everything pertaining to designing amazing learning experiences, this is for you. Go down below, apply today, and I will be sure to connect with you afterwards and to make sure that everything is going to be a right fit. But folks, folks, that's all I have for you. Hope you enjoyed everything today. Of course, please feel free to like, subscribe, leave this show a review wherever you are listening. I am not picky with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else is on the internet of how you're able to consume this content. But thank you so much once again for being here. And of course, stay nerdy out there. And I'll talk to you next time.